I'm going to start webinar. So we go live. If everyone can only turn off their audio and video, and then once at 8:30, when only Maria Fornella will turn back on her audio and video for introduction. Are we good to start?
Good luck, everyone.
So,
It's going to be great.
are you showing a video now? I'm confused because I thought it was after my introduction. Okay.
There is only a graphic on the screen just now, so that when people come in, they don't look at a blank screen.
Okay.
So you can keep your video and
Okay.
audio on if you want, no problem. I'm going off and then starting webinar.
Okay.
Go ahead, Maria.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. The numbers keep going up, but we are up to 175 right now. My name is Maria Fornella Oninger, and I'd like to introduce you to the Committee on Social, the NGO Committee on Social Development, first virtual civil society forum. Before we go into the session, I want to remind you that this session, as well as those of the rest of the week, will have interpretation from English into French and Spanish. And also, I'd like to remind you that whatever we learn, all the comments and lessons we learned today from this discussion will be reported Friday at our closing ceremony. Plus, we also have a very inspiring young social entrepreneur from Nigeria that will join us then, as well as officers from UNDESA and from the Bureau. Before I introduce today's moderator, we will show a video of the 70+ videos we received from NGOs from all over the world to bring the local experiences and the local voices to this global forum as a powerful reminder of our core mission of social inclusion and protection of basic rights. So we are ready for the video whenever you are.
Teknologi digital membantu kami untuk mengedukasi masyarakat, siswa-mahasiswa, menjangkau korban, melakukan pertemuan, edukasi, komunikasi, koordinasi, dan kerjasama dengan para mitra, mengadvokasi kasus dan kebijakan publik melalui media-media digital seperti Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, website, email, Zoom meeting. Sekian dan terima kasih.
Digital technology has not only allowed me to reach more students, but also to have remote learning be engaging.
Hello everyone, myself Pavitra S. I am studying BSc second year, Bangalore, India. Due to COVID-19 lockdown, college has started online classes. But for me, I am feeling difficulty to attend online classes because my parents are from a financially poor background and they are feeling difficult to provide proper mobile and data facilities for me to attend online class. So, and also my mobile will get hanged sometimes, and also I feel difficult to listen to the entire lecture in my online classes. So without any option, I am attending offline classes in the campus, but also I am feeling difficult and scared to come to college because of COVID-19.
สวัสดีค่ะชื่อนางรุ่งนภารักษ์สกุลสุกเกษมดิฉันใช้เทคโนโลยีดิจิตัลรับรู้ข่าวสารทันเหตุการณ์ต่างๆเกี่ยวกับโควิดในประเทศไทยลูกของดิฉันเรียนออนไลน์อยู่ที่บ้านโดยใช้เทคโนโลยีดิจิตัลดิฉันใช้เทคโนโลยีดิจิตัลในการซื้อของออนไลน์ทำธุรกรรมทางการเงินทำให้สะดวกสบายรวดเร็วมากยิ่งขึ้นดิฉันใช้เทคโนโลยีดิจิตัลไลฟ์สดออนไลน์ในการร่วมพิธีกรรมทางศาสนาเพราะนโยบายของรัฐขอบคุณค่ะ
I am here as a teacher in the rural parts of Zambia, and the problems which we face through the use of technology are the following. One, in this COVID era, we are highly encouraged to use online lessons and share learning materials to our learners, but due to poverty levels, people cannot afford to buy these devices. Number two, not everyone has got that knowledge on how to use computers. Number three, our mobile telecommunication companies and ISPs are also neglecting providing their services in the rural setup. So these are the major problems which we face in Zambia.
I work at a university in Canada, and I've seen great benefits of digital technology but I am also well aware that not all students have equal access to infrastructure, and in particular, internet availability in the rural areas of Canada. Often the bandwidth is not there to support the students' needs, whether they're in classes or just trying to get their exams done. They're dropped from classes, and that makes it very difficult and stressful for them. Universities across Canada are reporting an increase in mental health concerns of their students, and this problem with the internet in the rural areas is truly adding to it. It is a hindrance to their academic performance.
Those are such powerful images, powerful videos to remind us of the importance of digital inclusion. If we don't achieve digital inclusion, we will be leaving many behind. We will now go straight into the panel introductions, but I also wanted to remind you that there will be a Q&A segment with opportunities to intervene from the floor. We ask you to write your questions on the chat box, and as time permits, you will be called upon or they will be read out loud, depending. I am very pleased to introduce now the moderator for today's interactive panel, Huri Gudalekian. My introduction will be brief because everybody knows Huri. Huri is a relentless advocate for human rights, especially the rights of women and girls, to education and to empowerment. She is the UN representative of Unchained at Last, an NGO dedicated to end child marriage in the United States. She's also the chairwoman of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women and co-chair of the Working Group on Girls Coalition, member of the board of the Armenian Medical Fund USA, and many other activities. But I will turn the floor now to you, Huri. Welcome. We're very happy to see you.
Thank you, Maria, and the whole NGO Committee on Social Development team. You all have been working tirelessly to put this forum together, and I'm honored to be asked to be here. As you said, we do want to have this panel be interactive. I'm looking forward to having an in-depth conversation with this amazing collection of panelists. But I also want to just say that personally, what really attracted me to this conversation is that in the last year, we at NGO CSW have been like jolted into looking into this digital technology. I mean, even before the pandemic and the shutdown and the overwhelming Zoom meetings, we were already as a committee trying to see how we can include our sisters globally into the advocacy of UN. We had started doing Facebook Lives and even Zoom meetings actually. But then last March, it was like an overnight shock, and we've tried to adjust just like everybody else, but it's really scary. There's an advantage of having more people on board. We're grateful for that. But at the same time, we also realize the security and also the access to most of them. So just to give you like the background of why I'm so interested to hear how we can manage this new reality of digital technology and access. So I hope I have all my panelists on board. I would love to see their faces if they can turn on their cameras. Hello and welcome. So I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you a little bit before I ask you the serious question on how we're going to solve these digital issues. And I'll start with Naila, who's joining us from Beirut, Lebanon. As an Armenian who was born in Lebanon, I do feel a kinship with you. So I really would love to hear from you personally on how you became involved in your Lebanese alternative learning and the connection with the digital technology. Welcome. Oh, can you unmute yourself? That is the #1 sentence in 2020.
So, parev Huri. I'm Naila. I'm from the Lebanese Alternative Learning. Lebanese Alternative Learning is an educational technology NGO. We work on digitizing school programs, following an interactive procedure that focus on autonomy and analytical skills. How I got into this, I formerly were a French literature teacher. You might have heard it in my accent. And we started like 8 years ago by addressing children suffering from long-time illnesses at hospitals. Then we had, so I'm talking from Lebanon. I can go on and on forever with the multiple crises we had to address and how digital learning was a necessity. So with the Syrian refugee crisis, the need for digital increased. And now with COVID-19, the need to end the Beirut unfortunate blast on the 4th of August, the need to support children who are not accessing any education became more and more important.
Thank you so much. And I will say that we need to keep everything brief, otherwise I will interrupt very gently, but thank you. And honestly, Lebanese people, we have to learn resilience. I think you all have to really tell us how you survive all the tragedies that you've all faced. And I can't wait to learn more about what you do. We'll now go to Herman, and then I hope I pronounced your name right? Wonderful. What an honor to have you here. Thank you for being here. To be the Vice Minister of Digital Transformation, I mean, this is your life probably around the clock. But I am curious, again, the first round of questions is really to get to know you all personally. How do you bring your own personal experience to your profession? And I'm always asking this because my brother is our IT for our family, and everybody's always asking him on how to do things. Do your parents or relatives come to you and say, how do I get connected?
Absolutely. I can absolutely relate, Curie. Thank you for the warm welcome. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I was looking at the chat, and I'm excited to be honored and excited to be part of this panel. I'm seeing folks from the Philippines, Senegal. I saw Austria. I saw folks up in Minnesota in the US. So very, very excited to be here and talk about this very important subject. Yes, you're right. Digital transformation's on my mind 24/7. We have the fortune here in Colombia of having a president that from the beginning understands the role of technology. And we've been working very hard on a lot of different fronts. And hopefully we can get into a little bit more detail throughout this conversation. But to answer your question, absolutely, my personal experience brings, I'm bringing it to the table. Actually, a few weeks ago, not to go too far, I was helping my father with opening up a digital account, like a banking account with his phone. And it blew his mind. Like, what do you mean I don't have to go to the bank? I don't have to sign up forms. I'm like, Dad, just with your phone number, you sign up. I transferred money so he could have like a balance. I ordered the debit card right away. It wasn't at his doorstep within like 3 business days. So he's just blown away. But now it's the follow-up and the conversations around, okay, so what do I do with this? And it's very interesting. So it's that, and even with just there, not even like the age difference. It's people understanding, for instance, what's going with artificial intelligence, what's going on with all this data processing. We have a lot of super interesting conversations going on about how data is being used, and it's not necessarily an age gap or a geography gap. It's our understanding of technology and how it's shaping and changing our everyday lives. So so it's very exciting. I live and breathe for this stuff.
Fantastic. And thank you for that personal story. And a lot of times I feel like it's the fear that keeps them away at first. And once you let go of the fear, then there's...
Yes, absolutely. There was some convincing. I needed to talk them into it. It was not voluntary.
My money, it's online. Fantastic. Well, we'll move on to Rachel now from Unicef. And I'm also, I have to say, as a gender equality activist, I'm just so happy about this balance of this panel. But I'm also excited to be speaking to male colleagues too, because we don't get to hear from you often. So thank you all for being here. So Rachel, you, for a young woman, you have an impressive background. You've done so much already. So I'm just curious, what inspired you to pursue this field, and how do you see this affecting you personally and to move forward? Like, do you see that your work and what Unicef does personally, see how it can affect a girl in Afghanistan or a refugee camp somewhere?
Sure, yeah. So thanks, it's great to be here. And, you know, I was originally inspired to join this field and pursue this field because I believe that education really can change a person's trajectory, and that it can be the great equalizer if it's appropriately resourced and financed, and that it's provided equitably. So allowing all children and young people to develop the skills that they need to succeed in school, in life, in their communities, and so that every child and young person can realize their potential no matter where they are. So that sort of grounds my reason for pursuing this field. And I think, you know, the work of education and, you know, what I've seen personally in my work in this field is that I'm always amazed by how some children and families are able to access education despite the odds, but then constantly reminded that, you know, that's a small minority in many cases, and there's so many children and young people who remain out of reach or are not learning. Before COVID, there were 250 million out of school children in the world, and 825 million children were not gaining the secondary level skills that they needed, or were not on track to gain those skills. So I keep that in the back of my mind, and I think that, you know, all of us here today, our organizations and, you know, working together in partnership, I think that it is possible to change this and to provide education to all children and young people, and to sort of revisit what we mean by education and how it's provided, and to think more innovatively and using digital technologies to do that. So I'm very excited to join this session today.
Thank you. Can't wait to learn more about what UNICEF is doing to address those inequalities. Christian, welcome. So as a lawyer and a human rights activist, I can see how already this is an interesting topic for you, because you can see it as, you know, as an equality issue and also the policy part of it. But how did you become involved in this personally in the Digital Welfare State and Human Rights Project?
Thanks, Ori, and thanks also to the NGO committee and to all our participants for being here today. It's a large group from around the world, so I'm very excited to be talking to the world this morning from New York. Yeah, how I got started. So my project at present is based at NYU Law, where I direct the Digital Welfare State and Human Rights Project. And just very briefly, that is a project that does research and advocacy and tries to bring activists and students and academics together to discuss the impact that digitalization has on social protection systems and how it affects the human rights of individual beneficiaries. And that project started in 2019, but its real origins was actually in 2017, when I still worked as a senior advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. That's one of the UN special procedures of the Human Rights Council. And we were preparing a visit to the United States at the time in 2017, shortly after Trump came into office. And one of the things that was on our agenda at the time was homelessness. And we were especially looking at that in California. And through the work of author and activist Virginia Eubanks, we basically found out about this series of systems called coordinated entry systems that were used in California and elsewhere in the US to match the homeless to available housing. So they were undertaking substantive surveys of the homeless, and then they were applying this risk scoring algorithm to see who was most eligible for housing. And I won't get into the technical details, but we've met a lot of people in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in a very rich country close to Silicon Valley that were living in very miserable situations in dire poverty. And then we learned more about this coordinated entry system and how it was basically the central policy response of local governments to the problem of homelessness. And that for me was really an aha moment. It was really an eye opener because I reminded myself, is this really the best way to address systemic poverty? How could such a system even address poverty in the first place? And just to clarify that I'm not anti-technology as such, but I'm very skeptical about what I call technological centric thinking, the idea that technology is a solution for a lot of complicated problems. And poverty is, of course, a structural issue caused by a lot of different causes. And I'm a bit skeptical that there's a clean technical fix for problems like that. That's not how the world works. So that was my starting off point that led to subsequent work on the UN mandate. And then in 2019, we launched our own project at NYU Law. So that's where I'm coming from.
Fascinating. I'm even more curious to dive into the digital welfare state, because yes, we have to really be questioning everything, right? And can't just accept at face value. So thank you all so much for giving us a little, I feel like it's even more information than I expected. So thank you for that. And we can dive right into policy and how we can really each, from all your different backgrounds, make a difference. So Germaine, if you don't mind, I'll go right to you because you are the policy maker in so many ways. So how do we make sure that governments include the notion of digital empowerment in their development policies? And civil society is asking for inclusion of all underprivileged groups in this sweeping transformation of societies and economies so that no one is left behind. How can the tech sector reach out and become more inclusive and diverse? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. I think from the public policy perspective, we have a lot of different challenges, and very rightly so, this invitation or this request from civil society to include tech, to include all of the different sectors and their needs in the programs is absolutely justified. And we need, from the government perspective, from not just dictating, writing policy, we have a responsibility to include civil society, private sector, academia, everyone in the conversation. And that's part of what we've been working on very hard. And I'm speaking from the experience here in Colombia. We've made in the past few years a lot of progress, especially from the digital perspective, in addressing it from different fronts. And here from the ministry specifically, we have two major kind of like streams of work where we're trying to make sure that no one is left behind. And when we talk about no one is left behind is making sure that everybody's connected. So one extremely big effort that we're making is in connectivity and making sure we have access from the technological perspective to not just internet and connection, but quality connections. With the minister, and it's been the president's mandate, make sure that even the areas that are connected, that we have quality connection, because the demand on the networks today is bigger than it has ever been this past year. And we saw it in some of the intro videos, the challenges on making sure people have access to education. And I'm sure Rachel will dive a little bit more into that, but we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place, which is the basis to be able to access all of the opportunities, that people are able to realize their potential, that people are able to exercise all of their rights through the different tools. But we need to start off, and it's a call on the tech sector, on the telecom industry, to make sure that we're able to reach every corner, access all the rural areas, and we're able to build off of that. In Colombia, and I'm not going to get into the details of what we've done, but we modified the law to make sure we had we strengthened the ICT sector. We assigned to the telecommunication spectrum new localities. We're reaching more than 3,600 localities, municipalities throughout the country that previously didn't have access. We're moving from 2G and 3G to 4G over the next 3 to 4 years. We're connecting, just the end of last year, 10,000 schools was our initial goal. through a bidding or reverse bidding process, we're able to reach 15,000 schools that will be connected with free internet for 11 years, high quality internet, and it's going primarily to schools, to health, health facilities, and to kind of like vulnerable communities, so indigenous communities and the ones that have traditionally been isolated. So a huge effort from the policy perspective on that front. And then on the digital transformation side, and that's part of what we do, we focus our programs on people, on enterprise, and digital government. And without diving into a lot of detail, in each of these, we have initiatives. And from the public policy perspective, we need to make sure that there are specific programs designed to make sure that we're being inclusive, that nobody's left behind. So we have initiatives oriented towards people with disabilities, and not just, one of our programs is making sure we can provide two-way communication with people with hearing disabilities, so that they can access, and through the pandemic, they've been able to access all kinds of services because it's a free translation. We have gender-based programs and even intragender differentiated programs, because it's not just about age, but the level of knowledge within gender. We're promoting from the not just economic, but from the social, from the cultural perspective, inclusion. So we finance, just for instance, on the creative digital industries, we're financing participation in film festivals. We're the not IT solutions, like the emerging technology projects that we're co-financing. We have categories specifically designed for those that are addressing and solving issues to make sure we have a more inclusive society. And from the government, we're promoting more transparency. We have open data portals. We're making sure that the initiatives that we're deploying, people have access to it, that we can understand and analyze. We're promoting, for instance, on the skills front, from a very young age all the way through adulthood, a series of different programs. But one of them is focused on data science. And on the data science program, we're encouraging people to solve social issues. And we put forth during the training program real problems that people are addressing. For instance, one of the finalists in last year's second cohort that graduated was addressing education, desertion. So kids dropping out of school at the very local level with big data analysis, and we're providing the platform for those analysis to make sure that we're reducing those types of things happening. So I'll stop there. I know I'm
No, it's okay. I know. I hate to cut you off because I feel like, okay, can we just take this and adopt it to every country in the world? I mean, I don't know. It sounds like, at least on paper, your government is really doing their best to address. And I do want to leave enough time for some Q&A with our audience. So if I can ask the speakers to keep it to maybe a 3-minute comment, even though I'm asking you extensive questions. Rachel, I'll come to you, and it's a perfect follow-up with what we heard Colombia is doing. So how do we make sure that governments include the notion of digital empowerment in their development policies? And that's across the board. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, and it was great to hear the Vice Minister's response. And, it's great to hear about what's being done in Colombia. And I would say, in this increasingly virtual world that we're living in with thriving digital economies, children and young people really need to develop a wide range of digital skills to be successful. And so for most children, this means using and understanding technology, being able to search for and manage information, to communicate, to collaborate, to create and share content, and to solve problems in a safe and ethical way. And of course, as children transition to adulthood, some will acquire more advanced digital skills such as coding and animation, and skills for ICT careers. And as this demand for skills keeps growing and as the skills evolve, governments, businesses, and other stakeholders need to ensure that the appropriate level of digital skills are developed for all children and young people, and that this is done at scale and through different pathways. So at Unicef, we're committed to ending the skills crisis so that young people have the skills that they need to leapfrog to a brighter future. And we're seizing this once in a generation opportunity to reimagine education, to eradicate the digital divide and to radically scale up digital learning solutions, which meet every child and young person's unique learning needs and context. And by 2030, Unicef wants all 3.5 billion children and young people to have access to world-class digital learning. So this includes quality content, it includes connecting every school and community to the internet. It includes making sure that costs are affordable for devices, for connectivity, for data. It includes improving access to learning tools that young learners need and engaging young people as co-creators and agents of change. And so there are a few immediate policy directions that are crucial to ensure that this is possible. So first of all, ensuring that digital skills, content, and curricula is available in local languages and for relevant age groups, including marginalized populations. Ensuring that teachers are equipped with digital skills so that they can support their students in a digital or hybrid learning environment. Ensuring that digital skills are regularly measured and assessed regularly to allow for course correction. And as these skills are fast evolving, to ensure that continuous review of what types of skills are needed and to adapt content and curricula accordingly. And political will and government buy-in is really crucial for sustainability and for a systems approach for this. So as one example, the government of Rwanda is investing in connectivity, classroom infrastructure, and innovative digital content to empower learners with digital skills. And Unicef is working with the government of Rwanda and other key stakeholders to support investment opportunities, programs, innovations at a large scale to help people make positive transitions to adulthood. And it's just one other example. The Learning Passport, which was developed between UNICEF and Microsoft, has been utilized to scale up digital learning solutions in more than a dozen countries, and in each case working with the ministries of education and other relevant ministries in each government. And as one example of the Learning Passport, in Jordan, the Youth Learning Passport was launched this past June, which is a global digital learning platform free for young people to access. It combines both offline and online components, so tackling some of those connectivity issues. And it includes courses in advanced coding and software development, digital literacy, life skills, social entrepreneurship, and the English language. So a couple of examples out of many, and I'm happy to, I see my time is up, so I'll hand it back to you, Huri.
Thank you for following up. Yeah, I'm very fascinated with this public-private combination, right? With the Learning Passport, and even when Herman was talking about how they work with government, the government works with private sector as well to provide. So I would love to dive in a little bit later. Let's go quickly to Nyla and see how she solves some of these issues. How does lack of digital skills and access affect the opportunity to preserve culture and knowledge? How do you advocate to narrow that deepening inequality with your organization?
Thank you, Huri. So I will start by saying that by speaking about the personal experience of Lal. So during COVID-19, we had the chance to have the support of Malala Fund, who've been supporting us for many years now. And then we decided, we saw that we needed to support teachers. And here I would really like to emphasize the importance of listening. I think we change all our way of doing by simply listening. Because by listening, we often discover that our great solutions that have been made in our great offices and are not the ones that are really needed. By listening, we also understood the need for flexibility to adapt to different situations. Even in a small country like Lebanon, we had different community with different needs, and we needed to adapt to those needs. And it's often not the most sexy solution that is the one that is needed. Because we need to go baby step with some community. We need to implement solutions that are flexible and adapted to them, and not necessarily a beautiful, ready-made solution imported. By listening, we also understood the importance of making the field worker part of our solution. They are the one who will point the real challenges and needs for us to answer. And this is unfortunately not the approach of the government. So it is important solution and not listening to the needs of the field. By listening, we also understood that we often have preconceived idea about what a solution, what is the best solution, what a solution needs to be. We also understood the importance to change the measurement of impact of the funders. How it is not the numbers that count, it's not the timeline also. We have two challenges, numbers and timeline. So providing the biggest number in a strict timeline. And for us, it is very important that the funders be more flexible, that the quality counts more than the number, and also that there will be no issue on having more time to extend, to change, and the ability to change something that did not work. So often we do not have the time to change it, and we know that we are developing something that will not work. And we have to stress, as a small NGO in Lebanon, the stress of getting funds, and then the stress of spending the funds. And you have to spend the funds in a limited time. And I think all of those structures need to be reviewed, need to be rethought.
Yes.
And
I'm sorry, yes. No, already I feel like what you contributed, I hope I didn't interrupt. Were you going to finish up a sentence?
Yes, I wanted to finish by another thing is the importance also of empowering local actors. So by paraphrasing, don't give a man a fish, teach him how to fish. I will say, don't give a man or a woman a ready-made fished solution. Teach them how to make their own digital solution.
That's lovely. Thank you. And I'm sorry if I interrupted, but I already feel like I took away so much from what you said, listening and then the ability to change. If we can apply that to everything, right? That would be wonderful. Christian, I promise you, you have your full time. So
thank you.
And we'll just steal some moments from later on. So digital technology is not neutral. How do big data, algorithms, and artificial intelligence sometimes reinforce stereotypes, perpetuating discrimination and inequality? What can be done to ensure equal treatment and transparency in the delivery of digital public services? This is really your work.
Thank you. And of course, I deserve 30 minutes for such a complicated question, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. I mean, perhaps first to start on the premise of the question, I think there's often sort of two, what I see sort of flaws in the approach of policymakers and civil society to where it comes to digital technology questions. And obviously, you know, the technologies you just mentioned, it's also a broad range. So obviously a helpful discussion makes that more specific, which I hope to do in a second. But just those two flaws that I see is that I think, first of all, many of us are coming at this from the approach that in principle, introducing digital technologies in an equation is a good thing. And then subsequently, a lot of us then try to remedy as much as we can the potential bad outcomes that are related to introducing that technology. And we focus a lot of our energy then on the bad things the technology does, so to speak. And again, without sounding like a Luddite, because I'm really not. In some cases, or actually in quite a few cases that I've worked on, I'm first of all not per se convinced that here technology is the solution to the problem, even though we then focus a lot of our attention on that. And secondly, I think we shouldn't forget when we focus on the bad outcomes, such as inequality, human rights violations, that it's often not a product of the technology per se, but the wider environment in which the technology is introduced. So we didn't sort of start off with a heaven-like earth, but there's a long history of poverty, of inequality, of injustices of all kinds, and then the technology comes in. And then I think the framing question should be: does technology do anything to make the situation better, and or does it actually make things worse? And most importantly, for whom exactly? And just to try to make that very briefly concrete, which is borderline impossible, of course, with the time that we have, but we're currently doing research in one of the poorest countries in the world. I, for specific reasons, won't mention which one, but in that country, the government has rolled out a digital ID system meant to provide everyone with a unique identification number and a related biometric digital ID card. And the narrative there on the part of the officials and also on the part of international organizations involved is this will solve the problem of lack of an official identity on the part of many in that country, which is also a goal in the SDGs. And by giving people that digital ID, it will then resolve a lot of issues. They get better access to government services, to private services, like to banking, for instance. And in a way, digital ID, the technology or the technological system that surrounds it, is then presented as a unique chance. So in a bit of a caricature, this digital ID will resolve access problems, and it will also lead to a booming digital economy. And then we did field work and interviewed a lot of people in the poorest part of that country. And first of all, it's interesting that a lot of people, for instance, tried to access health services in the past. Lack of ID was not the main obstacle to getting health services. So in many cases, for instance, lack of money is a much bigger obstacle. But now with the ID introduced, increasingly the government is saying, okay, you cannot get healthcare, you cannot go to that hospital or that clinic if you do not have that new digital ID. So now the ID, the technological system, is becoming the obstacle. And of course, people fail to register because it's difficult. People lose their ID, there are errors on it, their fingerprints are not authenticated when they try to access a service. And so the ID becomes part of the problem. And what we're also seeing in terms of whom is this affecting, you see, it's people in rural areas, it's pregnant women, it's the elderly, and it's often those groups that are most affected because they don't have the money, for instance, to travel to a registration point. They don't have the resources to get a card replaced, and so on. And so to conclude, what is then the outcome here? So for the poorest and marginalized in that particular country, there's very little net benefit. There's not much more they can do than they could do before as a result of the system. There's a net cost imposed, cost of registering, cost of making sure you can continue to access your services with this new sort of gateway to government and private services. And there's a whole new dimension to inequality introduced, including, for instance, the situation where the elderly who lose their ID in some cases are just scrapped off a register, and before they actually die, they're actually sort of already dead in a way, because they can no longer get into a government program. So I think this is just one example how technology can reinforce pre-existing inequalities.
That's excellent. Wow, it's mind blown. I mean, you think about these things, but then when you hear it, you go, really, that makes complete sense. I'm so sorry for the organizers that we ran over a little bit with our Q&A, but it sounds like from all the chat, people are enjoying this. We are going to open the floor for questions. If somebody can bring us.
We have our first question from Winifred.
Fantastic. Welcome, Winifred. Please let us know. I know you think about this a lot, so I'd love to hear your question.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. And thank you. I'm Winifred Doherty, a member of the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd and of the NGO Community for Social Development. And this has been a very enriching panel. And I'd like to maybe endorse what Christiane has said in terms of our experience, but it would be in terms of not even being able to access, because the services, the technology, the infrastructure is not there when you go to the rural areas. And part of the reflection this morning had to do with the delivery, I think, also of social protection. So from Colombia, Herman, I was hugely interested yesterday when your minister laid out what was done in Colombia at a cost of $2 per household for connectivity. And he spoke about having a digital portfolio. And he also contrasted or put out about having an LA Silicon Valley in Colombia. And for me, this raises the tension between the inequalities. Where will the emphasis lie? And how can we ensure that people who are now not connected can be connected, and that indeed the delivery of social protection will happen? I don't know what the actual situation of social protection is in your country, but I would like to hear how that has facilitated access to social protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winifred. I'm just curious if we should take the two questions now and then answer. Is that okay?
If we can have a response to Winifred's question, and then we'll move to the next. Thank you.
Thank you. Herman, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Winifred. I'll try to be brief. And as I was mentioning initially, we're approaching this with an integral view, trying to take a strategic perspective. It's not one technology, one solution that is going to address all of the problems. On one side, and I think I saw one of the questions on the chat, we are connecting schools, but the $2 rate for households is something we're working on because we want to make sure it's also at home, especially in those most vulnerable conditions. So by the end of this year, we're going to reach 500,000 households. And for context, in Colombia, we have close to 50 million people. So that's on one front. On the second one, we're trying to make it easier. And I'm glad Christiane was mentioning digital ID. We're trying to work from government to make it easier for people to access services. With the connectivity, we're also giving out handhelds, devices, computers to schools, to teachers, to make sure that they can access precisely those tools with a user-centered design, because that was a clear example of establishing something that then creates an even bigger barrier. So we're trying to plan for all of our different constituents' needs, so to speak. So it's not one solution, but really customizing it while everybody's migrating and understanding that everybody's at a different point in time. So there's not necessarily, I don't want to say tension. We're trying to approach it, taking into perspective all of the different needs from everyone. So that's kind of like it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe the next question is by Paula.
We have a question from Alfredo.
Alfredo, okay. You have the floor.
Good evening. Good evening. Yes, I'm Alfredo Torno. I'm representing the WADA Foundation. My question actually, this is about digital inclusion in education and social protection for all, or inclusivity it's great and a noble intention. But the question is, how do we address the gap between urban and rural areas, where in some isolated areas, access to digital technologies is not at all possible, since even electricity is non-existent. But I suppose in some areas in Colombia or in some other parts of the world, not everyone has this connectivity. So how can we address that? How can we bridge that gap? Thank you.
Who would like to take that? Oh, Naila.
So we have, I will address this in two levels. So there is more and more offline access solutions. Like we have a small box that is a tiny server. We put all our content in it. and it is completely offline. And it works on a power bank, so it is also of electricity. So we can put a lot of programs. It also can track the data, and we can connect teachers and classrooms, etc. So this is one level. I think the second level, and what we discovered in remote areas in Lebanon, is that usually everybody have a phone, and we have to be creative with teaching with a phone. How can we teach with a WhatsApp? And one solution is also to create internet-free projects, internet-free resources. Those students at home should not stay all day. It's not like digital is not this, should not be the students staying all day in front of a screen. They should interact with their direct environment. And I think for teaching, the kitchen is a wonderful chemistry lab. The garden, the outside of the house is a wonderful biology lab. So let's remember that there are real things around us, not only virtual things. And let's create projects and lessons that will ask the student to interact with his environment to learn by doing things, actively doing things around him.
Thank you. I have a few more questions here in the chat that I would like to read out loud. And please, panelists, think about even going back to some of these questions when you get a chance to respond. First, the first question I see is, with the COVID-19 pandemic, many schools use digital teaching method for education. After 1 year, we found that many children faced education slide, or the capability on many subjectives dropped, especially those in rural areas who have not access to have no access to technology. How can we solve this problem? And then perhaps I'll just read a couple because it's kind of related. Rachel, what are your UNICEF recommendations for affordable access for schools? We have faced the request for operational costs of less than 20 USD month school of connectivity to the school. And then there's one for Nyla. Offline availability should be combined with the base access to information on the internet. Our experiences from OLPC, one laptop per child, has shown that purely offline results in loss of internet rather soon. Has shown that purely offline results in loss of interest rather soon, sorry. Okay, let's address these and then we'll see if there's any more questions.
Sure. So I can start. So thank you for these questions. And I also want to second what Nyla was saying about having both online and offline learning solutions. And so I'll cover that in part of my answer to this question as well. So at UNICEF, through our Reimagine Education initiative, we're working with Generation Unlimited and an initiative called GIGA to equalize access to world-class digital learning. So for example, with our partnership with GIGA, which is a partnership between UNICEF and ITU, we're mapping school connectivity and creating financial models to sustain connectivity in schools and communities. And to date, more than 800,000 schools in 15 countries have been mapped. So that's one way. But while we're working on improving connectivity, I think we also need to work at improving offline access as well, so that those children are not being left behind while they're waiting for connectivity. And I think that's exactly as Nyla described it as well. And so that's one aspect of the Learning Passport collaboration that I mentioned as well, which has both online and offline models that are being scaled up in countries. In terms of the issues of affordability, so we're seeking partnerships with hardware companies who can work to develop specifications and roll out low-cost devices so that the most marginalized children can access digital learning. And then when we look at issues of affordability of data as well, we've signed agreements with mobile network operators, which span more than 100 companies and territories with a footprint that reaches nearly 2 billion subscribers. So through these ways, we are working to sort of bridge those divides that children and countries are facing.
Thank you. We have one more person, Mark Sheffer, who wants to ask a question. Can we get him? Yes.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much. So my name is Mark Sheffer. I'm with the Baha'i International Community United Nations Office. Many thanks to the panel for so many very interesting thoughts. This question is directed primarily to Mr. Van Veen, but if anyone has thoughts, I appreciated the sort of nuance that you seem to be bringing to a lot of these issues. And it seems like often kind of this discussion around digital technologies can kind of fall into camps of supporters or detractors. And I was just wondering if you could give examples of how sort of technical or digital approaches can be integrated with social and relational approaches in ways that they sort of reinforce one another rather than this paradigm of feeling like we need to choose between one or the other.
Thanks, Mark. That's an excellent question. And let me weave into the answer also a response to what we just discussed on ensuring connectivity, especially for rural areas, for instance. So one of my experiences has been in a very rich country in the United Kingdom, where we undertook a UN visit in 2018. And what they did there is they rolled out a digital welfare program. So basically the major welfare program in the UK, you primarily interact with welfare authorities online now. There are many other dimensions in terms of automation and the use of more sophisticated technologies, but the basis of it is you apply and you maintain your benefits online. Now, to give an answer to you, Mark, I think in principle, there's obviously nothing wrong with that approach. I think a lot of single moms, for instance, are delighted if they can, instead of having to go to a certain office to apply for benefits, they can do that from behind a computer. In principle, there's nothing that I have against that. And especially now during COVID, you see that there are real benefits of a digital welfare system being able to scale as it did in the UK. And by comparison, the country I'm living in, the United States, did horribly on that count. In New York, the New York Times had a story about how people were using fax machines to send in their benefit applications when they lost their jobs, which is obviously an imperfect solution. But let me say this also in response to what the Vice Minister said earlier. And again, it's great that there's a big investment being made in infrastructure rollout and in sharing devices with those who need them. But there's an interim period in which there is a huge catch-up on the part of those who live in poor situations. And the danger is that the digital becomes the primary or even the dominant or the required form of interaction with government. And a lot of people will lose out in that interim. And that's something I saw in the UK, which obviously has more resources than Colombia, where a lot of people did not have access to internet because they lived in an underserved area, because they didn't have the money for an internet subscription, because they were doing things on their phone instead of on a laptop, and that complicated matters greatly, because they didn't have the confidence. Those sorts of problems obviously take decades to address. And if you then make a digital service mandatory in the interim, that will, sorry for my language, just screw people over in quite dramatic ways. And we saw that a lot of people lost out in the process. And we should be very careful, and this is the final thing I'll say, not to be mean to people. I'm a rich white male living in Brooklyn, New York. I have perfect internet connection, as you can see, and my life is fairly stable. So also going online on Zoom for me is not an issue. If I'm a single mom with 3 kids and have 2 jobs, and then I have to spend 30 hours a week communicating on a poor internet connection with the welfare authorities, that's a drama. And I think that's all too easily forgotten. So I hope I got to answer your question a little bit, Mark. It's a complicated one.
Thank you. We can now move on to the next question. Can Cynthia Stewart come online? Or would you like me to read her question?
Yeah, you can read it, Huri. Thank you.
Okay. So Oh, I'm sorry. Now wait. Here it is. Okay. Lifespan approach to ending inequalities to technology, but it is really exacerbated for older persons. Any suggestions for how to include older persons? Would anybody like to take this on?
So maybe I'll jump in here. So the question, to understand it better, is how do we ensure more geared towards the older side of the population? How do we make sure they're included? That's the question.
Exactly, because we talked a lot about children with Unicef on the panel, and we have advocates who are advocating for older people, and how do we make sure that it's we cover lifespan? We touched upon this a little bit earlier.
Right. So I think from the public policy and the government perspective, there need to be programs well thought out, as the question points out, for the entire spectrum of needs in our population, not just necessarily urban, rural, gender-based. Really, age is one of those that we try to weave in, even within the programs focused on women. We're working on an initiative that empowers women community leaders, especially in those that are in most vulnerable condition, to give them the tools. And it's a very personalized one-on-one approach, because as Christiane was saying, we're going to have for a very long time people that it's going to take a bit longer if we don't keep them in mind to catch up. And there needs to be a special attention paid to those, because the ones that are like our digital natives are moving at a much faster speed. So we need to make sure that those resources are dedicated to understand the environment. People learn differently, regardless of age, but even elders learn differently. And we need to, what we're deploying with the program that I was telling you about, that we're going to connect 15,000 new schools. There's an appropriation. I don't know if that's the correct translation, but it's a strategy that comes as soon as that internet is activated, because people are going to speak for the first time in their lives. We have a program that comes right behind it in making sure we train the community leaders, that we're including the elders, that we're including the schools teachers, that we're including the civil society leaders, that we're included like the armed forces. So we take a look at the community itself, and we're hiring local people. We will be hiring local people to do this support and training right as people are getting connected. Because also one of the challenges we have, and this goes beyond age, is making sure we're using that connectivity in a useful manner. The most natural first step is I'm chatting, I'm watching videos, I'm connecting, but we need to evolve that use to a more mature use, so to speak. I'm using it on a cultural level to make sure I'm defining my rights, to make sure I'm voicing my opinion. If I'm against government, I need to be able to understand how to connect and voice my opinions. How do I participate as a citizen in all of these discussions? So we need to also evolve, and maybe with that need in mind, it'll be easier to make sure that those communities, even those older ones, get engaged. We need to find what's a driver, what's a need that's going to help them make sure they get empowered with the technology for their specific needs.
Thank you. And the key from your comment is really reaching out to the local, right? I think when you hire locally, they know the elderly who needs the help, instead of somebody coming in from an urban or, from the government trying to tell them what to do.
Absolutely. And it's a challenge in COVID times, but it's part of what we're addressing. And that's we're going to be installing the first ones in May. And we redesigned our whole strategy even last year. So it's definitely a challenge. It's not an easy question, but we're trying.
The intention is there. Thank you so much. We have, I believe, probably the last question, but let's see. Orapin, the floor is yours. I hope I said your name right.
Thank you. My question is, the quality of digital education. In many cases, as I experience, the children cannot learn through the computer and internet, especially during the COVID pandemic. the school have closed, or the children have to learn at home. And, with at home, you need to have parents to supervise, or one who stay home, especially those who doesn't have anyone home. The parents have to work outside all day long. How do we deal with this type of situation? And we found that, the children cannot learn much during the past year. Most of the time they don't really learn at home that well. I think from the beginning, we heard about, how you install the infrastructure and stuff like that. And we have not heard anything about how do we improve the quality of education.
Rachel or Nyla or anybody?
Sure, I'm happy to start, and then Nyla, if you want to add on. Okay, great.
We have one more question, and then we're going to do wrap up, just so that you guys time yourself.
Okay, so I'll be very brief in my response, but I think Orapin, yeah, you highlight a real challenge. That's a challenge for parents and for families and for children all over the world. And so I think that one part of this is looking at the digital learning solutions themselves and really making them more what at Unicef we term world-class, but improving the quality of these tools to be able to deliver education more effectively. Having a learning platform that's not meeting the needs of the child and isn't allowing them to learn, it's something, but it's not really providing the quality learning opportunities that children so need. So there are a couple of aspects that we at Unicef use when we think about what makes a learning solution world class. And so that's solutions that are interactive, where there's feedback loops between the learner and the teacher or facilitator. That's digital learning platforms that are adaptive and can target instruction to meet children's needs and meeting their unique learning levels, and by personalizing those. They're learning platforms and solutions that are playful and therefore are engaging and motivating. So looking at aspects such as gamification, which improves students' motivation with learning platforms. We also need to look at solutions that are inclusive. So, what needs to be there for children with disabilities, for example, and thinking about universal design for learning and making sure that that's incorporated in digital learning solutions. And I think also, finally, an important aspect to think about is that they're nimble. So that these digital platforms don't stand alone, that they're complementary to the wider provision of education, and that it can be combined with other approaches, such as paper-based materials, such as using mobile phones. So very briefly, and then over, I guess, back to you, Huri.
Yes, please. Let's give the floor to Marianne McAvoy for the final question. And then, like I said, speakers can address any issues that I didn't give you a chance to with the questions. Marianne, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. My question is focused on trauma-informed services. So given the fact that we've increased access to digital learning, working in the nonprofit sector and educational development, I just recognize that there's been such a focus on academic learning, right? And there's been a much smaller focus on social emotional learning. And I'm curious if there's been discussion about increasing, even if it's not social emotional platforms, training in the neuroscience behind trauma, because so many of our children they already experienced trauma, and now given the pandemic, it's exacerbated in one way or another. So given what we know, just the physiological and psychological impact of trauma on learning, is that something that's been addressed within these digital platforms?
Nyla, perhaps you want to take that okay, and then we'll just do the wrap up. Thank you.
I'll do the wrap up. by answering the question if you want, because I will answer 2 questions.
I think that's a great idea, because I know everybody's going to want some more time to really bring all the thoughts together. So this is the order we're going to go with, is Naila, then Herman, and then Rachel, Christian, to answer all questions that we left behind, and then your wrap up. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
This will bring me back to the beginning and the listening part of it. So yes, there have been programs. We offer services for other NGOs. There have been social emotional learning digitized programs with big NGOs. But with one big difficulties, it is very delicate to deal with social emotional learning and learning, especially in person and especially virtually. If you are not really educated to do this, one small anecdote is those children in a refugee camp that were okay. They were living in this refugee camp. They was born there. Everything was fine until they had social emotional learning. They became traumatized. They were not before that. And so this is very, very delicate. Another thing for parents, I think we need to not only to have, as Rachel said, a friendly platform for the student, but we also need to educate parents, and this is also what we are trying to address. And by educating parents, I'm not saying to give tutorial or explain how the site works. It's by educating them on what challenges they are facing. They shout a lot, they are mad, they lose their temper. They do not let the child work autonomously. They want him to succeed. They want him to have. So we have to educate them on how to give the child autonomy, how to listen to the child, how not to do something else while listening to the child. How to accept failures. This is a huge something. How to make failure part of the learning, because failure is an important part of the learning, and children should go through failure because this is one of the major part of learning. And so I think we have to give guidance to the parents, not only on the tutorial and how to use a platform, but especially on how to behave. And this will be my closing. Thank you. Thank you all. It has been great to be part of this panel.
You are amazing. I am just so glad I met you and everything I'm learning from you. Thank you for your words. We'll move on to Herman. I'm not going to talk too much now because I'll have my time to wrap up. Thank you, Naila. Herman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think very briefly, we must collectively put inclusion at the forefront of our digital discussions, because it can be very easy for us to leave a group behind, especially at the speed at which technology moves. I personally believe the best policy, the best programs are going to be constructed with this collaboration from all different stakeholders: government, private sector, academia, civil society. I'll mention something, Naila, was brought up at the beginning, and it's listening. It's listening because a lot of times people think they have the idea, the solution. Christian gave us a perfect example with the digital ID, in which it's a well thought out intended program, but until you're out there listening, connecting, seeing specifically what each of the different needs are from the different communities, you won't be able to design programs that are going to have long-lasting impact. So and I guess the last point would be to approach all of our digital inclusion efforts from like a strategic, like an integral perspective. Sometimes we're working on our lane, and it can be easy to just get lost in that. That's the one solution to address it all. So take a step back, talk, listen, because to be able to close the divide, we need to have an integral approach on different fronts, as we've discussed: connectivity, the digital inclusion programs for children, for our elders, gender-based, urban, rural. There's a lot of different things that come into play. So we need to have that collaboration perspective with an integral view of the solutions.
Fantastic. I really do wish you luck with that's a whole, I'm impressed with what your government is taking on, and let's hope my government, the US, also expands and becomes more inclusive. Rachel.
Sure, thanks. So I'd also like to focus on an aspect of inclusivity, and that's girls' digital learning, which we didn't have a chance to raise earlier in this discussion. But I think, in addition to the deep digital divides and connectivity divides that we're facing, there's also a deep gender divide, and that's really been revealed and exacerbated through the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are a lot of barriers that girls face to developing the skills that they need, which includes digital skills. And this is because of gender stereotyping within and beyond education systems, lack of women role models and teachers, particularly in higher grades, different gendered expectations for girls and boys in terms of the subjects that they take or the careers that they pursue. And these digital skills gaps that we see lead also to further labor and employability gaps, which impact not only a girl's own life, but the lives of her family members and of her community. And, especially in this day and age, without digital skills, girls and women will be left further behind from achieving equal economic and social participation. And just to put this in perspective a bit, there's an estimate from the Malala Fund that 20 million more secondary school aged girls could be out of school post COVID-19. And in addition, more than 4 million girls could be at risk of early marriage due to COVID-19. So we see that the repercussions of the gender digital divide are real. And I think that this is something that we need to take into consideration as we all continue this work. Thank you.
I could not have said it better. As you know, I'm also advocating for girls and especially early marriage, and taking away education obviously does not help. I'm sorry. Christian, the floor is yours and you have at least a full 3 minutes.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much. So let me first say to the participants, many of whom I think are NGOs working on social protection and education, that this is your debate too. Like too often, I come across this fear of technology in the civil society sector, because that is seen as the area of expertise of folks working on digital rights, organizations with a track record on issues of digital education, digital social protection. But I think by now this is such a cross-cutting issue that every organization working on social justice, working on human rights, working on poverty eradication, the digital element of their work should be a key component of the agenda. And I just wanted to say a word of sort of empowerment and recognition that you can do this and you belong in that space. Too often, I think people are uncertain. The second thing to say, partly in response to what the Vice Minister said, I couldn't agree more, obviously, that social inclusion needs to be front and center in the digitalization of the state especially, but also society as a whole. And obviously, no one should be left behind, but that implies that no one is currently already behind. And that's the whole problem here. There's so many people who are way back there, and we're racing in that direction. And digitalization has a real track record of further reinforcing that gap. Relatedly, I couldn't agree more that listening and also taking into account what people have to say, especially those living in vulnerability, is crucial. But I've seen too many cases, for instance, in my home country of the Netherlands, where I worked on a digital welfare system, where the people affected, who were often the poorest in big cities in the Netherlands, were never consulted, were never in any meaningful way integrated in the rollout of these systems. And you would consider the Netherlands normally as a country that's pretty democratic. So I think while that is essential, it's also a huge battle to ensure real democracy in this space. And I think the final thing to say there is that while we all need to discuss this and be involved in the discussion, I think the COVID crisis has shown the importance of government, the importance of collective entities to tackle these issues. And while we need all the help we can from the private sector, from academia and so forth, ultimately, I think where it comes to, for instance, building infrastructures, education, there's a primary responsibility on the part of the government to ensure that goes well. We need governments, this crisis has shown.
Fantastic. It gave me a chance to catch up with some of the comments too. This multitasking is crazy. I was just trying to grab every word you were saying, Christian. So we do have, now we can relax. We still have 9 full minutes to really collect everything. I mean, you know, maybe a little less because we need a minute to catch up between this meeting and the next meeting that starts at 10 o'clock. But I do want everybody to like take a deep breath and just bring in everything that we just heard today. I'm excited to say that there will be some polls, or at least one poll that we're going to take, so that will give us an idea of where we stand as a community in this one event, and then I'll do my wrap-up comments.
The first poll is just launched, total of 2 polls.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Everybody, I'm sure you can see, so let's do this.
The votes are still coming in, so we'll give it a minute more. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the results of the poll. The question was, should an internet connection be a fundamental right for all? And as you can see, an overwhelming 91% thinks that it should. We thank you all for polling and for answering the poll, because we take this back as a call to action for when we communicate and continue our advocacy. So thank you so much, everybody. There will be one more poll, again, as part of the action. The second poll is on the screen. I do hope you can see it, and begin voting. Oh, this is very interesting.
Yeah, these are really good questions, Jillian. I'm curious now.
I'm actually watching the fight for, I mean, it just seems to be such an equal balance as the votes keep coming in. Be rest assured that these poll results will be published and will be shared on our social media as well. This is public information. It's your opinion. So vote it in, and we will be more than happy to share this as a call for action and as our advocacy points as we continue into the plenary sessions of the days. There's still time to vote, so you can go ahead if you haven't yet. I think the internet is causing a slight time lag as we see a delay in some of the responses coming in. So much for bridging the digital divide.
Okay, let's see.
So these are the results.
Drum rolls.
Sorry?
Drum rolls.
Yeah, absolutely. Internet
Wow, I
access
see
be
what
made a fundamental right for all. And 40% thinks inscribe it as a new public good in a national piece of legislation. I'm so happy this comes up here, not just for the Vice Minister who's in the room, but for us to be able to share this with all member states, that this is what the public is asking for, this is what NGOs are asking for, and it's the percentage speaks for itself. Thank you for that. And with that, Huri, I hand over to you to close.
I thank you so much, Jillian. I love polls, and it just, because sometimes, we're so separated from the audience as much as we did make this interactive. So thank you for all those who participated in the poll as well. And it addresses some of the notes I took here. So thank you to all the moderators for allowing me to make this very casual and personal. So, and for bringing yourselves into this. I wanted to just pick up something about what Naila said. I mean, no preferential treatment here, but I was really impressed with your approach and the social emotional learning part of it, because, for a digital conversation, we really have to also understand as human entities, we do need that personal, right? We don't want to stay in this isolated Zoom world forever. We do want to make sure that everybody has access for their own good, but that personal connection, that emotional connection, especially for children and older people, are very important. And I also want to actually bring up something that Herman said, and it comes up in that poll as well. We talk about multi-stakeholder approach at the UN, and you very rightly do say that it's not just government. You're working with private sector and civil society, and you're listening, which is really important. I want to raise the issue of really being careful about working with private sector and with this multi-stakeholder. I think one of the things, exercises that we do as advocates sometimes comes in handy in these decision-making processes is that when we're in a room or in a discussion, we need to all be sure on who has the power in that room. And even though civil society is present, if you're sitting around a table with a very wealthy digital company and a government who can really have a lot of say about what happens to you, are we making sure that we're allowing that civil society or the organization that is helping you on the ground the space and the power to really make a difference? I think that's something to think about. And I know I mentioned this already, but what Rachel said about girls, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, I know that's the background I'm coming from, but we also know that it's not just my own personal opinion. Data shows that if we leave girls behind, we're just not going to succeed. So it's really important that we consider any policies that we make, that we don't just say all children or all adults or all, there's still a difference. We've come a long way in understanding the gender difference, but I think it's really important to highlight that. And what Christian said actually is really important. We are already in an unequal world, right? I mean, there's just so many people that we are leaving behind, disability, LGBTQI, you name it. There are pockets of population that, not only they're not heard, but sometimes when we hear from them, we just brush it off. We're like, well, you're not a majority. You're just a small part of this population, and then I hate to say it, but the white male emerges. And this is nothing personal. It's just it's the world that we've been living in for a long time. And I'm very grateful for the white male that does speak up and come into this world and, you know, fight for human rights, because that's the only way, if we all combine our energies and intentions together, that we can perhaps make this world a better place, which is going to take a long time. Oh my God, I spoke too long after I told everybody not to speak too long. Jillian, and forgive me. Thank you all so much. This was so helpful, and see you in the next session.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.